Hi, good evening. My name is Jay Rothman. I am the host of the show. Welcome to Real Men, Real Talk, Live. Welcome back to the studio. Again, my name is Jay. I'm the host of the show. I am excited to introduce tonight in the studio, we have Mr. Evis Heath in the top shelf, coming in from Australia, the man of the land from down under. Welcome to Real Men, Real Talk Live tonight, Ev.
Thanks for having me as always, my brothers.
We have Josh Ritcher. He calls Southern California home. Welcome to the show, Josh.
Great to be here as always. Love you guys.
And of course, we have Mr. Jeff Fasano. He calls Nashville, Tennessee home today. Welcome to the show, gentlemen, this evening. I want to take a moment here to welcome our viewers and guests coming in from all over the world tonight, streaming in from Roku, Amazon TV, Facebook. Let's see where else we're coming in from, YouTube as well as LinkedIn. So if you should hear something that you like or love, we invite you to drop it down in the comments. If you're coming in from one of your social media stations. If you're coming in from Roku and Amazon, welcome to Real Men, Real Talk Live tonight. Tonight's episode is number 87, and it's all about chasing pleasure. Ever since you're in the top shelf, I'm going to invite you to kick us off, warm us up, and heat us up for tonight's episode.
Yeah, my brother. All our brothers and sisters there on the other side of the pond. If you're here in the land down under, thanks for joining. We're looking forward to diving in deep about chasing pleasure tonight. And what would that be a bad thing, my brothers and sisters? You know, I know from on my journey, we all, I guess, in some form or another, go on a quest to seek some sort of form of joy, happiness, or some sort of fulfillment within our lives. And as we go along the road, I think as we get older, we get into particular areas within our life where we seem to chase particular things to keep fulfilling a sense of happiness or joy within our lives that may not necessarily be giving us a fulfillment of some sort of inner peace. I know for me on my journey, my brothers and sisters, when I really got into my teens, into those early adult years, I was living for the weekend. I wasn't living for the week's end. I was actually living for the weekend because I knew for me over the weekend, that was my idea of being able to chase that happiness or that bit of joy within my life to escape the work week. Now, whatever it may have been, whether it was through alcohol, all of the other partying that I did for those early years, I was really disguising my happiness from that word that we call pleasure. Now, I've helped many people over the years really define what happiness, joy, fulfillment is within their lives, and really try to understand why they may be having things like food as pleasure, why they may be having alcohol as pleasure, drugs as pleasure, sex as pleasure, entertainment as pleasure, and all these other forms of external stimulations within the outside to fulfill this sense of happiness. So on tonight on a Real Men Real Talk Live, I'm looking forward to diving in deep a little bit more about why we may be chasing this idea of happiness and how it can actually be possibly blocking us for a sense of fulfillment and not having this pleasure within our lives. Now, we might be saying, you know, like it's not such a bad thing to have these simple pleasures within our lives. The problem is that really comes around from what I've done and what I've seen people on their journey is that, like I mentioned, things like having food for pleasure, it causes food disorder or disorderly eating. People, when they're having alcohol for pleasure, it causes forms of addiction. And it goes on and on and on. So I know we're going to be diving in deep with the brothers tonight, and I'm looking forward to getting a little bit more about the science, as I'm sure my brother Josh would like to share a little bit about why we try to seek some of these pleasures within our life.
So much there, Ev. So much there. Wow. One hell of an opener.
I want to take a
What were you
moment here to Josh before you jump in here. Bob Phillips coming in from Sedona, Arizona. He says pleasure equals pursuing fame, money, and good looks. He says, I'm looking forward to the show, and we welcome you to the show, Bob Phillips. Hope you're having a beautiful evening in the canyon and that you're on the mend. Josh, what do you make of what Evis just had to share tonight?
Oh man, there was so much there, Ev. I could have splintered off in about 8 different directions, but I think what hit me the most, and when we talked about this in the production meeting, I'm gonna have to give a nod to Jeff, because Jeff brought this up and it stuck with me, Jeff, since we talked about it, where you said that joy is just an emotion. It's just it's a feeling, and it's not something to achieve. Emotions come and flow. They ebb within us, and we're never stuck in an emotion, thankfully, because there's those really hard and awful times that we sure would wish went faster. And then we want to slow down those moments that we're having such a great time and we are feeling joy, and we want to hold on to that and cling. We have to remind ourselves that emotions come and go, all of them, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I was king of numbing and using alcohol, like you spoke about, Ev, and because I was numbing painful emotions. And that was the way that I felt I could control those in my life and diminish those in my life. But the problem with numbing and or seeking pleasure outside of ourselves in an incessant way, or in a way to avoid pain, is that it never lasts. You always need more. And when we do numb, we numb good emotions as well. So the goal would be to stay awake, aware, allowing emotions to ebb and flow and do their thing, and not get stuck in on this treadmill of chasing them, and constantly having to seek out more to fill the lack that we are feeling inside of us. So that's where I'm going with the top of the show. But I'm sure as our shows go, we are going to ebb and flow through this topic for the next hour, and I can't wait to hear where we go.
Well, this all popped into my head when I read something in socials about joy, that joy should be ever present in our life. And I started thinking about that, and I was like, well, joy is a feeling. I'm feeling joyous right now. So many people out there say I should always be in this place of joy in my life. And I just started thinking about that, and I said, joy is a feeling. It's really about fulfillment in our life, the excitation for life. Am I excited about my life, and am I fulfilled with my life? And then came in, and within that, then the feeling of joy is in the mix of that. If my life is fulfilling and I'm fulfilled with my life, and I still have an excitation for life, joy, the feeling of joy, is going to be in the mix there, as all our other feelings will be. We cannot sustain joy or one feeling all the time. It's just impossible. Because if we are, then we are going to be cutting off all our other feelings. And then what we'll do is go into our mental body, our mind, and said, oh, wow, this person, this quote unquote spiritual leader, said that we should be living in joy all the time. Well, you just can't, because joy is a feeling. And then what came up was chasing pleasure. If we are continually chasing pleasure in our life, we're missing having a fulfilled life. And the excitation for life will go into a place of constantly being in the maze of life, seeking that pleasure. If you can just picture a maze, and there's a mouse in the maze, and at the end of the maze is that piece of cheese, and that mouse is seeking that pleasure to get to that piece of cheese. That's seeking pleasure in our life. Are we moving through life in this maze, constantly seeking pleasure? Maybe because we're not finding it within ourselves. We can have pleasure doing things, pleasure in our life doing things, but it's not that momentary hit. It's about fulfillment in our life. And then looking at and asking the question, as we just said in the green room, one of the reasons why we can continue to seek pleasure outside of ourselves is because we aren't content enough within ourselves with what is enough for ourselves.
It's important to 100%, brother. It's important to understand and understand too, brothers and sisters, really what the difference is between a feeling and emotion. I mean, they're two separate things, and I don't think people really understand that. They try and pile them in all into the one bundle. You know, to me, from my understanding, my perspective, I see feelings as more personal, and they do definitely last a little bit longer, but they develop through experiences. Whereas emotions, these are just hardwired into each and all of us as a human being universally. So for me, happiness is a feeling, while joy, it is the emotion. So that joy emotion, it's a fleeting emotion. It can be here, then it can be gone the next minute. But what happens with a lot of these emotions, they tend to need an external stimuli to be able to trigger it or set it off.
Mm-hmm.
And then the thing is too, Ev, we want it to last. That's the chasing pleasure thing.
Mm-hmm.
Wow,
Mm-hmm.
that moment was so joyful, and I want it to last, and I want it to last, and I want to hold on to it, and maybe I'll strangle it. And then naturally, as Ev just says, as that feeling subsides and another feeling comes into place and another emotion comes into place, I don't like that. I want that joy, and I'm going to keep on chasing it.
I like what Melissa Lynn Dudley says here, if I may. She says, we cannot sustain a fleshy experience of pleasure. Peace is a place of spiritual fulfillment.
Mm.
What do you make of that, Ev?
She stole my clothes today, sister.
Yeah, right.
The
Thanks,
lit,
Melissa.
man.
It's been a great show.
Thanks, Melissa. Thanks, sister. I'll catch you later. But, you know, she's obviously lit on that angle. And, you know, what I really wanted to come in there is because when I was seeking those pleasures that we're talking about from those external stimuli, as that younger fella being distracted by the outside, whatever it may have been within my life, as I've become more wiser in my own being and coming from more of my self-awareness, I started to not even seek or need to go out and chase a particular emotional feeling, but I was happy to sit in inner peace and contentment. And for me, those are states of being as opposed to some of these emotions and feelings.
Exactly. Fulfillment in that place of peace, content, fulfilled with life, which then creates an excitation for life as opposed to chasing down the where am I going to seek that next pleasurable thing? Then we come down to being in the moment of life.
And we do have control. I'll tell a quick story. On New Year's Eve, I was supposed to go to a party in Vegas, actually. It's not quite my thing, but it was a private party at a friend's, and I was supposed to be there, and then COVID started raging, and he canceled the party. And so I was at home on New Year's Eve and sort of content in the moment. But as the night started building, I had a desire to be out with people and having fun because I've been working out of the house a lot. And so I honored that desire and I said, well, screw it. I don't need anybody else to go out with. I can go out with myself. And I had heard about this party, and I got there, and there was a moment. It was about 11 p.m. and I wasn't necessarily talking to a whole lot of people. I was kind of on the edge of the dance floor. I was wanting to dance, but I was feeling a bit alone and maybe even a little bit awkward about it. And I had that moment where in my head, I was like, well, maybe I should just call it and go home. And those like feelings of, loneliness were starting to come in. And I was able to catch that in the moment and say, wait a minute. No, I'm out and I want to have fun and I want to dance and I don't need anybody to do that. And so I just let go of any of my expectations, let go of any thoughts that were entering my head that I was there alone and I looked like the lonely, guy on the edge of the floor. And I just made my way out to the middle of the dance floor and I just danced for the next 3 hours by myself. Ooh. And I just had a grin on my face. People kind of came and went and, we smiled and danced together for a bit. And that was it. And it was that was exactly what I wanted. And so we can catch these moments too, where our brain, our thoughts are trying to go one way, which generates an emotion of either feeling lonely or I'm the lonely guy, or maybe stories step in on, you're the weird lonely guy in the corner. And I just said, no, I'm going to change the story. I'm going to change it and I'm going to do what I wanted to do. And I ended up having a great night.
So Josh, for you, was that pleasure or was that, did that bring you inner joy?
Both, but it was inner joy because I was just there with the music, just having fun. And it was just me and moving my body and being in rhythm. And that was, thanks, Mary. That was pleasure.
It's interesting. I'm sure each one of you have been at a social gathering, and I know I have witnessed seeing women get up and go onto the dance floor and dance by themselves. I've also, of course, seen women dance with other women, but it's very rare that I have witnessed seeing a man feeling confident enough with himself to do just that. In that moment, Josh, I am wondering, were there any old stories, any old narratives or scripts that
Sure.
you had to kind of work through to have the courage to go out there and dance by yourself?
Sure. Yeah, there was the whole, guys don't know how to dance like as well as women, or that crossed my head. Oh, everybody's just looking at you because you're the one guy out there by yourself. That went through my head. And I just chose not to entertain the thought. They're just thoughts. They pass just like our feelings do. And so I just saw them and said, thank you. I'm going to choose a different reality, which is I'm going to have fun. And I don't care if there's anybody around.
And the other part of it that I find interesting is that I presume that you were alcohol free, you were sober.
I am.
And that takes, it's a whole lot easier to get out there and let down your guard, if I may, when there's alcohol or drugs being useful or potentially what people perceive as to help calm them down, to have the confidence to go out there. It takes even more confidence to go out there sober and work through all those old scripts and narratives to just be present and enjoy the moment. I'm curious, Josh, did you learn anything about yourself from that experience of pleasure on New Year's Eve?
It was just a new level of maybe just anchoring in that truth that we we can change the channel. You know, we can always change the channel, and it doesn't take anything outside of us to change that channel. We can do it ourselves, and it starts with the awareness. We observe the thoughts that come through, and we can either jump on the bus and take a ride, or we can say, no thanks, I'm catching the next one.
I love that. I want to take a moment here, Josh. I want to acknowledge June coming in from Canada. Welcome, June, back to Real Men Real Talk Live this evening. She says, I find many of us are chasing or looking for all the pleasures and or joy in life in all the wrong places. I find that the inner pleasure of joy, peace, and love of oneself is the most fulfilling pleasure there is. All other pleasures and are temporary, and most do serve its purpose, but for that moment. The real pleasure and joy comes from within. This is everlasting and is powerful. I thank you for sharing that, June. Jeff, what I want to ask you to just kind of break it down. What's your spin on what June just shared?
Well, essentially, yeah. So what's important, and she says that in there, is we have pleasurable moments in life. In a moment in life, something happens and brings us joy, pleasure, laughter. It raises our resonance and vibration, and we're in that moment. That pleasurable moment, that just brought me some pleasure. But we can't, it's not something that we can sustain constantly. Or then we start chasing it and seeking the pleasure. What she's talking about is once again, is being fulfilled within ourselves in our life. And that's where, when we are fulfilled with our life, that brings a contentment and that brings peace.
So
and
Jeff,
with,
then,
and with
go
that,
ahead.
there comes an excitation. So that moment was very pleasurable. And then I'll be in that moment, I'll feel those feelings and then go, oh, that was cool. And that then comes the fulfillment of it, as opposed to looking at it as Ev said at the beginning, as a hit to the nervous system. Oh, wow, that was great. I got to go find the next one. I got to go find the next one. I got to go find the next one. And that's all we keep on doing. That's chasing pleasure.
There you go. Josh, what are you gonna bump Jeff with?
I was just gonna say, Jeff, but okay, so for the person out there that literally has no clue right now how to find their inner joy, what would be a path to find this place? This special place.
I think
self-care is the
plus
gateway.
Also it's awareness. So what we're saying is chasing pleasure. So you can begin with, wow, am I constantly chasing after something to give me that pleasure? So that's a way to start, because it's about awareness and consciousness. Wow, these guys are talking about chasing pleasure, getting the hit outside of ourselves. Am I doing that? Am I doing that? And then if we're aware of that, saying, oh, wow. And am I looking for that hit to stay there all the time? So that's one way. That's a beginning of doing it. And then asking yourself, wow, am I fulfilled within myself in my life? So basically it's just becoming aware at the beginning. The only way we can shift and change our habits, patterns, rituals, and behaviors is to become aware of them.
Ev, you mentioned self-care. I'm curious, from your perspective, how is self-care the gateway to pleasure?
It's one of the ways, and the thing is, like what we're talking about here and what the sister's talking about there, you think the reality of really what some of these fleeting ideas of joy are coming from an external environment like we're talking about. But what we're saying here is that internal joy is lasting. So when we start looking after ourselves, put in the right foods, get out in nature, all of the self-care rituals and non-negotiables that we share on the show, then this can definitely be a gateway into having that more everlasting sense of joy. But again, I mean, you could go around in the chat right here, right now, and you ask everyone's definition of joy, and believe me, I reckon everyone's response would be totally different. So it's really relevant to the individual. But for me and for the people that I've helped along the years, really being able to understand joy as more of a fulfillment is through self-care.
So what I want to do is I'd like to invite our viewers and listeners that are with us live tonight streaming, drop it down in the comments if you're coming in from social media. What has been the greatest pleasure that you've experienced? Give us one or two in the last 6 months to a year at most. What has brought you the greatest pleasure? If you can identify it in just a quick snap of the finger. Carrie Crary says, coming in from Arizona, welcome to the show tonight, Carrie Crary. She says, there is nothing wrong with pleasure. We should chase it in the correct and healthy forms. I get pleasure hiking.
Exactly.
Perfect, Carrie.
He's actually right.
And you know what?
There is absolutely nothing wrong with having moments like Carrie's talking about. I get pleasure hiking. Well, I get pleasure taking photographs. But it's what we're talking about is not always seeking it out there. We have pleasurable moments in our life, and we can feel those moments and be in those moments. But we also, it's the fulfillment within, and we're not going through the maze of life constantly seeking that pleasure out there.
It just hit me.
Go ahead,
as you were
Jeff.
talking, Jeff.
Bring it home, brother. Bring it home.
What a distinction would be, how you can tell the difference, because that's the hard part, right?
Yeah.
So when I'm excited about something that I want to do, I feel pulled to it. Like I feel it pulling me towards it. And when I'm chasing pleasure, it's because I feel uncomfortable with something in me and I want to change that. Bingo. And so me wanting to change it is up here. I'm like, I don't like this. I'm going to go find pleasure to make this go away versus, oh my God, I just want to go on a hike because I want to see the beautiful ocean, from up high in the Santa Monica Mountains or whatever. It's different. One's a draw and the other's a running away from.
And you know what's interesting? You see where Josh's hands were coming from when he said the excitation? His hands were here. Your heart space. Right in here. Your heart space, your soul space. The excitation is here in our heart space and our soul space. And the way Josh just said, seeking the pleasure is up in our mind.
I want to take a moment here just to acknowledge some of our viewers that are.
Yeah, what do you guys got?
Tonight's challenge. Beverly Annette says, my greatest pleasure is connection to like-minded souls. And Bev, I want to take a moment here. I want to just acknowledge that because I was actually going to bring that up just about 3 minutes ago. That is one of the greatest pleasures that I have that I never experienced up until 6 years ago, was connecting with other people. I didn't know how to connect with like-minded people in a healthy way. Why? Probably because I didn't like myself. So how could I find like-minded people? I'm making a half a joke there, but that's my truth. It is one of the greatest pleasures that I get. One of the greatest joys that I get is when I just have an intimate conversation with a woman, a man, a friend, even a stranger, whether it be in passing a very short season on let's say a hiking trail, or it could be on a video call. It could be coaching a client. It could just be having guests come into our home for the dinners that we do here. Mary Kelly says her greatest pleasure was getting engaged to this beautiful man in a cave, totally surprised. Who's that man that she's talking about? But you know, I love
about
that, Mary. But the truth is, as I said, in the last 6 months to a year, and that was over 3 years ago. But I'll take that. Thank you. That means a lot to me. Almost got teary-eyed there for a second. Christopher Peckham, coming in from Flagstaff, says being able to stay connected with someone that's always just out of physical reach. What does that mean? Tell me more.
Yearning after someone who's unavailable.
Tell us more.
Tell us more. Jeremy says, to keep it simple, I am the pleasure. For me,
Boom.
it begins within me.
There you go. Love that.
Boom.
Love that. I think we've got to, really address too what the other side of pleasure. Like I think we become more emotionally intelligent when we start to learn to process the sadness that we may be trying to escape to find the pleasure within our lives.
Yep.
So this is really a conversation where we get to all understand together that we have to process these emotions of sadness just as much as that we really try to escape with these pleasures for joy and happiness.
Exactly.
And I think that's the biggest lesson that we all need to sort of learn tonight.
We've all, I mean, I know that I was on that, in that maze of always seeking pleasure. And then when the energy, I mean, folks, our feelings and emotions are energy. That's all it simply is. So when we get that hit of pleasure, the energy hits us, but that energy has to move. So we feel pleasure, we feel that joy, we feel those feelings, but the energy's got to move. So the feelings move. And then in that space, another feeling will come, but in that space, there's a little void. After that hit comes, that joy comes, that pleasure comes, it moves. And then there's a microsecond of emptiness or void. But for me, when that emptiness or void would come, my nervous system would get a little funky, and I'd want to find something else in the maze to bring me pleasure. But the whole thing about it was, like Ev just said, underneath that joy, could be created is that void, that emptiness, and then feelings that come up, because behind it might come up because you're looking for that hit of pleasure. After that hit, that pleasure and that energy moves, underneath it might come sadness. And the reason why we want to go and keep on chasing that pleasure is, like Ev said, we might not want to feel that sadness that comes in there. So I've got to keep on chasing the pleasure.
Ev, what were you going to say?
It's just funny. Jeff keeps using the word and get the hit of pleasure. So this is where we need to really understand the science of what we're talking about with pleasure, because I'm sure Brother Josh could, really back me up here on the brain science. And like the old song, might be before some people's time, but if you think about the old song by the Divinals that came up on my mind, it's a fine line between pleasure and pain. So you think about that, there's a particular hit that we're talking about here, which is dopamine. And these places of pleasure and pain actually come from the same cortex within inside of the brain. So we can really understand the duality between these two different feelings and emotions, and why we actually do forever try and chase these pleasures within our lives.
Well, Ev, just to add a little humor to tonight's episode, since you just gave us a little fun there, let's hit play.
Why you play with me? It's at your wrist that I'll set you free. Play at your own risk, girl. Play at your own risk. I'm telling you.
So, Ev, tell us more about this little 15-second clip. What's the message you're trying to convey around the alcohol and the munchies?
It's funny because, we're forever, and that's why you see me picking my face out in the end, because I end up trying to keep chasing that idea of pleasure. So we keep trying to fulfill this hit like Jeff's talking about. And no matter how many of those lollies, and by the way, my brothers and sisters, I didn't actually eat those. I just put them in my mouth and I spat them
Okay,
straight
sure.
Mhm.
that was water in the glass too.
Yeah, but some of that sugar seeped in though.
There you go.
Oh man, I've got to say,
That's why you're crashing today, dude.
Really, that's
That's why you're having a low vibrational day.
really.
but on a serious note, like on the full reel of that particular video, what I was actually explaining in the 30 seconds of it is that when we find food for pleasure, it actually turns into these disorders that we see a lot of the planet in currently at the moment. And you think through all of the stuff we've been in, people trying to chase pleasure through food, they're trying to chase pleasure through alcohol. And unfortunately, with the alcohol, as we all know, it starts to form addictions within our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And a depressant. So yeah,
A false depressant, yeah.
yeah, it counteracts what you're going for in the first place.
That's it, man. That's
I want to come back, Ev, because you really were starting to go down the rabbit hole when you mentioned the science behind the emotions and feelings that come up. Now, you mentioned dopamine. Is that we get the hit of dopamine is the hormone that floods our body. But is it possible? Is a setup question. Is that are there other hormones that can be released that come from that spontaneous feeling around pleasure? So, for example,
Well, you think oxytocin? Beautiful.
there you go. That's exactly
Beautiful.
what I was going to ask. What about
I
oxytocin?
know, Mr. Rothman. I know you too well.
Tell us more. How does
So that's
for those that may not be familiar with oxytocin is?
You got to understand that that's more from a heart space, my brothers and sisters. We're thinking about this dopamine. We're coming up from a head space. So when we get on the deeper science and we can go very deep in those sort of areas, we start to understand this and understand it from more of a hormone perspective, why we may be trying to go out and seek some of these pleasures within our lives. And that's why it always comes back to this self-awareness, really focusing on why we may be seeking pleasures within our lives. What are triggering these? Is it certain people within our life? Is it a certain place? Brother Josh was in an environment which he could have easily gone to the bottle and seek, that sort of assistance to be able to do the dancing, but he chose not to. So really, at the end of the day, it is a choice, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So, Josh, in that moment when you were on the dance floor, New Year's Eve, do you have now in this moment, looking back, do you have any awareness of what flooded your body from, let's say, from the hormonal perspective? What was released?
I guess I didn't have any awareness. It felt, when you let the mind go, you can just be. And it was that state of being where I could just be whatever I wanted to be in that moment. And I just wanted to dance. So yeah, it's, and it's a very good point that, we keep hitting is that, it's a choice. It's a choice. And those thoughts generate emotions as well. And so when we entertain thoughts that might not be supportive, or in the adverse, things like doing a gratitude practice every day, it's going to generate those thoughts are going to generate emotions of appreciation and looking around your life at the things that you do have currently, rather than seeking outside of you to always, get the next hit, get the next thing. So there are things that we can intentionally do to generate chemicals within our body too. And so that was me on the floor. I was choosing a different story, which was generating different emotions. And then when I was able to dive into those emotions, then just pure joy and having a great time followed. But it was because of changing the channel, which also changes our chemistry. Those thoughts
I
change
wanna
our chemistry in
I
the
want to
body.
take a moment here just to acknowledge Star coming in from Sedona, Arizona tonight. She says, I presume she's going, I'm not sure what the context was, but what I picked up from this was that pleasure for her was from drugs to hugs.
Hey,
Is that not a beautiful shift or pivot?
that
Magic.
is.
How many of us thought that we were finding pleasure in alcohol and drugs, and now can find pleasure just from sharing a loving hug without any expectations in front of it or behind it?
Mhm.
Mm.
Someone
I-
asked me this.
It's
Oh,
what's
go
that,
ahead.
Josh? Go ahead.
Someone asked me this week what my biggest source of joy has been lately, and it's this show. It's doing this show with you guys. It's holding this space. It is that virtual hug that we have here. This love, this non-judgment, this safe, vulnerable place to share and to heal and to talk about our lives and what's going on and to openly discuss how we navigate this crazy thing called life. And together, and with all the viewers and all the feedback and everything, it's this space, this virtual hug.
Thank you, Josh.
Mm.
Well, this is that moment where you got me. I got them chills. This just came through. Jeff, I want to ask you in our production meeting yesterday, just real briefly, you had shared a moment of pleasure with us from an experience you had the night before. You were so excited to share it. You know what I'm talking about, right?
You mean the new television, the television show that I was binging on Wednesday?
That's clean. This is a PG rated program, so we're going to do our best to keep it clean. Well, most of the time.
Yeah,
Are you referring to the new television show that I was binging on Tuesday night?
Yeah. Did that experience? It felt to me, it brought you some pleasure.
It brought me more fulfillment than pleasure. Well, full disclosure, I was binging our show on the Roku channel. That's full disclosure, folks. I decided on Tuesday night I was determined, that part of me that was so determined to find the show and on the Roku channel, because I have a Roku box, and I found it. And I just clicked on the show, last week's show, and I started watching it from an entirely different perspective than me actually being on the show. And then I watched that episode, and then automatically it goes to the next episode and the next episode. And I binged about 3 episodes, and at times I had tears in my eyes. I was feeling it. I was looking at all of us in a very, very different way. Even myself, I was just watching it from a viewer's standpoint of watching a new television show. And it was very fulfilling to be this viewer, to experience it, in a brand new way than watching it on my computer screen tomorrow morning when I get up and go in and watch, and then interact with everybody that's watching. And it was wonderful. It was a wonderful experience that I didn't ever thought. I thought I'd be picking apart everything about myself and how I look and the lighting and this, that, and the other thing. And I did that for a couple of seconds, but I really enjoyed what was the energy of it, and I just watched it in a whole new way. And I know this is very self-serving, folks, but and I encourage you to watch it that way, because I had, my hot tea, my feet were up, and I was watching a brand new television show that I never watched before.
Yeah, I don't think it was self-serving. I brought it up really, Jeff, because there was such excitement in our meeting yesterday. Almost like I saw this younger Jeff. I saw little Jeff, just having this experience that he didn't know was possible. And clearly you got pleasure out of watching it, not critiquing, but just being an observer. And it just brought you such joy in that moment. And
it was wonderful, but also, this is the excitation. And folks, I'll be honest with you. We started this 80 million episodes ago to see it, and the excitation of knowing where this is actually going.
beautiful.
I know this is going to be a little more, but listening to Josh and Jay and Evis, and because I'm in it and I wasn't in it and I was sitting there, I was like, I was learning more things, because even when I watch it the day after, I'm still watching it in a whole different way. And I was learning a lot. Like, I heard each guy say something. I'm like, wow, whoa, that was pretty cool.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thanks for sharing that, Jeff Fasano. I want to take us back to reality here and share something that Abigail Engel shared in this moment about one of the greatest pleasures she had in her life. Was I had 2 miscarriages, and my first daughter was stillborn, full term. The moment my second daughter cried and was in my arms was the purest joy. I was completely happy in that moment.
Beautiful. Yep.
I want to take us into shift us into high gear here. I want to bring us into the last segment of tonight's show. And tonight it's going to be all about tips, tricks, and tools to help you find your way through the maze to pleasure without having to chase it. So Josh, Ritcher,
No.
I'm going to put you up first.
All right. Well, I'm going to talk about discomfort, because I was very, very good at numbing and avoiding that place for many years. And what I learned was that I can remind myself in a moment that what I'm feeling is temporary. That the discomfort that I'm feeling, the displeasure or something triggered me huge, and all I wanted to do was run or numb or find any way out of that negative emotion, usually involving alcohol, that I could simply, as Ev said, be in that emotion and not do anything. And I think we often get caught, or at least I know it was my experience, that I felt like I always had to change that. Like I had to do something. That discomfort was a call to action to do something. And we can just be. Just like we can be in joy on a dance floor by ourselves on New Year's Eve, we can also be in that sadness, as Ev said. We can be in that discomfort. And it's okay too. And actually, it's a really interesting thing when you get comfortable being in an emotion, a negative emotion, you can actually start to get curious around it, where the discomfort isn't triggering. You know that you're safe. You know that you're okay. And then you can start to get curious and go, what is this about? And that's where this beautiful self-discovery happens. And that's where healing starts to happen. And that's where we can start to get these beautiful awarenesses where these past stories or things that do trigger and upset us start to come from. And then we also teach our wonderful brain that's just trying to keep us happy and out of these bad thoughts that it's actually safe and okay to be in those emotions too, and that we don't have to run and we don't have to numb. So for me, being with all the emotions and learning to be okay with that was a really fun and liberating thing.
Beautiful.
Love that, brother.
Fasano, you're up. Tips, tricks, or tools, man? Hit us up.
I'm going back to what Carrie Crary, her comment about hiking brings me pleasure, and then being in that moment. I said it earlier. It's about raising our awareness and consciousness to our behaviors, our thoughts, our feelings, and being in that moment. So as we all go through life, ask yourself a question: what brings me the greatest amount of joy in my life that comes from my heart space, that I can feel and be in those moments, and all of that is coming from within. We all have moments in time that bring us pleasure. They're pleasurable moments. When, like I said earlier, and we feel that, we're in that, and we can recreate that. Like Carrie Crary said, when I hike, it brings me pleasure. And as Ev said earlier, self-care. So we are not seeking this pleasure outside of ourselves, but we're creating pleasurable moments in our life that raises our fulfillment of life. That's why I bring back Carrie. Hiking is wonderful. It could lead to self-discovery, and it brings us a pleasure in our heart space, a pleasurable moment in our heart space. And then we can keep on recreating these pleasurable moments that are healthy, that are fulfilling. And that brings the excitation for life. I am excited about going on this 25-mile bike ride today because it's pleasurable. And then we can have those moments in life as opposed to seeking pleasure outside of ourselves to get that instant hit of gratification. And then when that instant hit of gratification moves, the energy moves, the feelings move, then we keep on the hamster wheel of seeking pleasure outside of ourselves.
Beautiful.
Magic, brother.
Mm-hmm.
Ev, I got a question for you. And that maybe will be your segue, a gateway into a tip, trick, tool, or gift, as Christopher Peckham requested. Is it possible in the same breath to experience pleasure and pain?
Just like I said on the song by the Divinals, brother, it's a fine line between pleasure and pain, my friend. So you think from that angle of whether it's possible in the same breath. The thing is, what we've talked about tonight is really the duality of these emotions, and to be able to become more emotionally intelligent and be able to understand why we may be having some feelings of sadness and be able to process some of those things and those painful things within our life, and then be able to enjoy this happiness or joy within our life. I mean, that is the human experience, isn't it? To be able to experience both of those in the breath. And this is the magic of it, my brothers and sisters. But how I want to quickly finish off, Jay, to obviously respect the time, is we've learned tonight, my brothers and sisters, that really happiness and this joy are great motivators for temporary feelings and emotions within our life in a particular moment. One thing for me, when I started to go more into a deeper area of just being happy with inner peace and contentment, was moving not so much for pleasure for myself, but pleasure for others. So I want to really invite you, my brothers and sisters, and ask yourself, how can you do something for another brother or sister? Maybe someone that's maybe not well off as you. Maybe you can do something better for a local charity down the road or something. But how could you put something else down in your life today that will create a better world to be living in? Because you think about the last couple of years, my brothers and sisters, there are so many people in here that have been, probably trying to escape a lot of the pains and sadnesses of the world and seeking pleasures. But there is no better thing that you can do than be of service to others.
Beautiful.
So I'll leave it there, my brother.
The only challenge or caveat, I should say, Ev, and it's not that often that I'll challenge you, but this is one of those moments. This is where it gets slippery. This is where we go down that rabbit hole, is that if we are not taking time to connect with ourselves and we're putting all of our energy into giving it to being of service to others, that gets a little slippery.
100%, brother. And then that's one of the beautiful gifts that we learn from Heart Space. So as we make this journey back home, my brothers and sisters, and come back to Heart Space like Jeff's talking about, when we start to learn the equal, reciprocal exchange and give and receive of energy.
There you go.
Yeah.
So that's called inner mastery, my brothers and sisters.
Beautiful.
Star breaks it down a little simpler. She says self-service first.
Boom.
It's the same thing. That's all I'm saying is that, look, the four of us are in a business of being of service to others, no doubt. We give close to 5 hours a week for this program to do just that, between our meetings, production meetings, our post-show meeting, the show itself, and then the work we do outside of Real Men, Real Talk Live. But what we have all learned, and we continue to be reminded when we have those moments of forgetfulness, is that before we could be of service to others, we have to first be of service to ourselves.
Yeah.
It is key. It is key to our emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual well-being.
Yeah.
That's my own experience. And that's what I have found the sweet spot that works for me. And I know we're speaking the same language here. So Jolene coming in, she says from the Northwest, she says, so true, Jay. Balance of self-care for self and others. There you go. It's all in a balance. And so this is my moment where I would say, anyone have a quick question for me? We could close out with a question, and I'm happy to answer.
I want to hear what's in your heart, Jay. Free flow, brother.
Yeah. What is your take? I think we all gave our take on chasing pleasure. What is your take, Jay?
For me, it really is about connecting with people. Now, I'm not talking about connecting around the weather or sports or politics or current events. No, that's not the connection I'm talking about. I'm talking about this connection right here. And when I know that I've reached your heart, your soul, there is no greater joy in my life. The only other moment that brings me pleasure or inner peace is when I'm able to connect with myself. And for me, it happens in nature when I'm by myself. Although this afternoon, Mary and I took a beautiful hike for pleasure, and we went off trail and we climbed some red rocks, incredible vista views. And our intention was to meditate. It didn't quite work out that way, but for me, that was pleasure. When I could spend time with my partner and just be in nature and just to be present. Presence
Jay,
brings me pleasure. Go ahead.
Real quick question. So all of what you described, is that describing fulfillment in your life?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because I chased pleasure for probably from the time I was a young teenager all the way through age 54. And it wasn't sustainable. And it never reached me at my soul, never reached me at my heart space. And that is by far the greatest gift that I have received in just the past 6 years. And so with that, gentlemen, I love you, viewers. Thank you so much for joining us on episode 87 this evening on Real Men Real Talk Live. Have a beautiful weekend. We love you guys. Stay healthy, do some self-care, and find pleasure. Find pleasure within. And with that, peace and blessings.